It was on an ordinary Tuesday that I realized how shattered my marriage was. 23 years together, and it took a simple request for the mask to fall off. I had been sick for almost 3 months. A spinal surgery that was supposed to be simple became complicated, leaving me temporarily with reduced mobility. The doctors assured me that I would return to normal, but the process would be slow. That morning, I woke up feeling more pain than usual. I could barely move my legs without feeling stabbing pain in my lower back. The pain medication was no longer having the same effect. I spent the night practically sleepless, trying to find a tolerable position. Carlos slept like a rock beside me, indifferent to my muffled groans into the pillow. When the alarm went off at 6, he got up without looking at me, without asking how I had slept. He went to the bathroom and began his morning routine. I remained in bed, gathering strength to start the day. I heard the shower running, the sound of the toothbrush, the closet door opening and closing. All the sounds of normalcy while I felt increasingly invisible. I finally managed to sit on the edge of the bed. I needed to take a shower too. My hair was oily, my skin impregnated with the sweat of a poorly slept night. The physiotherapist was coming at 10, and I wanted to look presentable. With great effort, I reached the cane resting on the bedside table and got up slowly, feeling each vertebra protest. Carlos came out of the bathroom already dressed for work, hair combed, beard shaved, smelling of expensive cologne. He didn't usually have breakfast at home. He preferred to eat something at the bakery near the office. Our eyes met for a moment. "Good morning," I murmured, leaning heavily on the cane. He responded with a nod while checking his phone. "I have an important meeting today. I'll be home late." It was no surprise. Since I got sick, his important meetings had multiplied, as had the late arrivals. Some days he didn't even come home, claiming he was sleeping at a colleague's apartment that was closer to the office. I knew it was a lie, but I didn't have the energy to confront him. "Carlos," I called when he was already at the bedroom door. "Could you help me with the bath today? I'm feeling more pain than usual." It wasn't an unusual request. In the first days after the surgery, the nurse we hired helped me with hygiene. When she left, Carlos took on the task, reluctantly, but he did. Over time, I regained some independence, but there were days, like that one, when I needed help. He stopped at the door, his back to me. I saw his shoulders tense, his hand gripping the doorknob harder than necessary. "Again?" he asked, without turning around. "Sorry," I responded automatically. "It's just that today I'm having a harder time." "There's always an excuse, isn't there?" He interrupted me, finally turning around. His face was different. The mask of forced patience he had been wearing for the past few weeks was gone. There was only irritation, contempt maybe. "It's not an excuse," I tried to explain, feeling a knot form in my throat. "I spent the whole night in pain. I barely slept. If you could just help me get into the shower. I'm not your servant." The words came out like stones, heavy, cutting. I froze, my cane trembling in my hand. I looked at the man who had vowed to love me in sickness and in health, and I didn't recognize a single line of his face. "I never said you were," I managed to reply, my voice almost fading. Carlos went back into the bathroom, grabbed a clean towel from the cabinet, and returned. For a moment, I thought he had repented, that he was going to help me, but he just threw the towel on the floor at my feet. "Here's your towel. Deal with it." And he left, slamming the bedroom door so hard that the noise reverberated in my chest like a gunshot. I stood there, petrified, staring at that light blue towel on the floor, the towel we bought together on our last trip before the surgery, when we were still a normal couple, when he still pretended to care. The tears came without warning, thick and hot, streaming down my face. I couldn't bend down to pick up the towel. I couldn't move. It felt like someone had sucked all the air out of the room, leaving only a painful emptiness where my marriage used to be. I don't know how long I stood there crying, leaning on the cane. 5 minutes? 10? Long enough for my leg to start tingling, threatening to give way. With great effort, I sat back on the bed, my back throbbing in protest with every movement. The silence of the apartment was deafening. Carlos had left, and I was alone with the brutal reality that he left behind. It wasn't the physical pain that was destroying me at that moment. It was the crystal clear realization that the man with whom I had shared more than half of my life now saw me as a burden, a nuisance, something to be discarded. "I'm not your servant." The words echoed in my mind, each repetition more painful than the last, as if I had turned my husband into a servant by needing temporary help, as if my momentary fragility was a personal affront to him. The clock on the wall showed 7:15. The physical therapist would only arrive at 10, 3 whole hours ahead, alone with my humiliation. I looked at the cell phone on the bedside table. I could call someone. My sister, maybe. Or Maria, my childhood friend who lived 2 blocks away. But what would I say? My husband refused to help me with the bath and threw the towel on the floor? The shame was as great as the pain. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tears. I needed to make a decision. Either I stayed there, defeated, waiting for someone to come to my rescue, or I found a way to do what needed to be done. I chose the second option. With extreme care, using the cane for support, I stood up again. I picked up the towel from the floor, using the tip of the cane to drag it to the bed. The simple act of bending over sent a sharp pang through my spine, eliciting an involuntary groan. I dragged myself to the bathroom, inch by inch, the towel under my arm, the cane firmly planted on the ground. The journey that would normally take seconds took almost 5 minutes. When I finally arrived, I was panting, covered in cold sweat. The shower was an ordeal. I leaned on the bars we had installed on the walls, moving with the slowness of someone walking on thin ice. Each movement was calculated, each gesture a small battle against the pain. The hot water offered some relief, but it didn't erase Carlos's words, nor the gesture. The towel on the floor, as if I were less than nothing. The doorbell rang at 10 o'clock sharp. Helena, the physical therapist, was punctual as always. I dragged myself to the door, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Good morning, Lucia," she greeted cheerfully. "How are we today?" I was about to give the automatic response. "I'm fine, thank you," when something inside me broke. The tears came back, uncontrollable, and my body started to tremble. Helena dropped her bag and supported me, guiding me to the sofa. "What happened? Is the pain worse?" Between sobs, I told her everything. The words tumbled out, mixed with tears of anger, shame, and sadness. I told her about the sleepless night, the plea for help, the towel thrown on the floor, about the frequent meetings, the late arrivals, the increasingly common absences, about how I felt invisible in my own marriage. Helena listened to me in silence, holding my hands between hers. When I finished, she didn't offer immediate advice or empty consolations. She simply said, "You don't deserve to be treated like this, Lucia. No one does." Those were the truest words I had heard in months. I didn't deserve that treatment. I didn't deserve to be discarded as something worthless just because I was temporarily vulnerable. I didn't deserve to carry the burden of illness alone, while simultaneously bearing the weight of a crumbling marriage. That morning, we didn't have our usual physiotherapy session. Instead, Helena helped me make decisions. We called my sister, who immediately offered to come and take me to her home. We called Maria, who agreed to stop by the apartment later to pick up some clothes and essential items. We called my doctor, who recommended a psychologist to help me process everything that was happening. When the phone rang again, it was Carlos. I hesitated before answering, but Helena encouraged me with a nod. "Lucia," he began cautiously, "about this morning. I was stressed with work and I don't want your excuses," I interrupted, surprised at the firmness in my own voice. "I'm going to Claudia's house. Don't look for me." I hung up before he could respond, before his empty apologies could make me waver, before I faltered and accepted crumbs of attention again. The towel was still on the bed, a light blue reminder of the casual cruelty that had replaced love in my marriage. I looked at it one last time before leaving the room. I wouldn't take it with me, neither it, nor the memories that now stained every corner of that apartment. The first weeks at my sister's house were all about adaptation. Claudia had been living alone since her divorce, 5 years ago, in a spacious third-floor apartment. No elevator. Details that would have gone unnoticed before were now monumental obstacles. Each step was an ordeal for my recovering back. "We can look for another place," Claudia suggested when she noticed my suffering. "Maybe rent something on the ground floor for a few months." "No," I replied, determined. "I'll manage. It's temporary." And so it was. Every day, I faced that staircase, step by step, with a firm cane, teeth clenched against the pain. It was my little personal battle, a way to prove to myself that I could overcome challenges, even when they seemed insurmountable. Carlos called dozens of times in the first few weeks, sent messages, emails, even flowers. I didn't respond to any of them. I asked Claudia not to let him in if he showed up. Of course he did. 3 times in the first week. My sister, loyal as always, kept the door closed. "He seems remorseful," she commented one night, while helping me with the exercises the physical therapist had recommended. "Remorseful for what, exactly?" I asked, feeling the muscle in my leg burn with the stretch. "For showing who he really is?" Claudia didn't insist. She, better than anyone, understood about failed marriages and false promises of change. The physical therapy continued, now in a clinic near Claudia's house. Helena, my original physical therapist, had recommended a colleague. At first, I missed her. We had formed a bond in those weeks of treatment, especially after her help on the day of the rupture. But Ricardo, the new physical therapist, was competent and kind. He didn't ask about my personal life beyond the necessary, which was a relief. Even so, there were days when the pain became unbearable. Not just physical pain. For that, there were painkillers. But the pain of betrayal, of abandonment. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, my heart racing, the phrase, "I'm not your servant," echoing in my nightmares. The image of the towel on the floor haunted my dreams like a light blue specter. My body reacted to the emotional trauma. I lost weight quickly, 5 kilograms in the first month. My skin became dull. My hair started to fall out more than usual. The doctor diagnosed anemia and prescribed supplements. "Stress," he explained. "It affects the entire body." I started having digestive problems, constant heartburn, stomach pain. Tests revealed early-stage nervous gastritis. More medication. More recommendations to avoid stress. As if it were that simple. The worst were the muscle spasms. They came without warning, contracting the muscles in my back so violently that they left me immobilized, gasping in pain. Ricardo explained that it was common in post-surgery patients, especially those facing severe stress situations. "Your body is in a constant fight or flight mode," he said during a particularly difficult session. "We need to find ways to calm it." I started doing guided relaxation sessions. I learned breathing techniques. I tried meditation, yoga adapted to my limitations, even aromatherapy. Nothing seemed to work completely. The ghost of Carlos and his cruel words followed me everywhere, materializing in painful muscle contractions, sleepless nights, meals left half-eaten because my stomach refused to accept food. It was Maria who suggested therapy. My childhood friend visited me regularly, bringing small gifts, books, her comforting presence. One Sunday, while we were having tea on Claudia's porch, she brought up the subject. "I've been seeing a psychologist," she commented casually, "because of the divorce and everything else. It's helped me a lot." I averted my eyes. "I don't think it's for me." "Why not?" "I don't like the idea of telling my problems to a stranger." Maria smiled gently. "But it's okay to tell them to your spine, your stomach, your sleep." Her comment caught me off guard. It was true. I was keeping everything inside, and my body was screaming in protest. Every muscle spasm, every sleepless night, every rejected meal was a way for my body to beg for help. I started therapy the following week. Doctor. Paulo was a man in his 50s, with a calm voice and attentive eyes. In the first sessions, I spoke little. I was so used to keeping everything to myself that the words seemed stuck in my throat. "You don't need to tell everything at once," he assured. "Let's go at your pace." Gradually, the dam began to break. I talked about Carlos, about our 23-year marriage, about how everything started to fall apart after my surgery. I talked about the towel on the floor, about the words that still haunted me. "How did you feel at that moment?" Dr. Paulo asked. "Invisible," I answered without hesitation, as if I had stopped being a person and become a burden. "And now? How do you feel?" I reflected for a moment. "Broken. Not just my spine, but everything." He nodded, without judgment. "It's natural to feel that way. You've gone through two simultaneous traumas, the surgery and the emotional abandonment. Your body and mind are processing both." The sessions with Dr. Paulo became anchors in my week. Gradually, I began to understand patterns in my marriage that I had never noticed before. How I always yielded to Carlos's wishes, how I had abandoned dreams, friendships, even parts of my personality to fit into what he expected of me. "I'm not saying that you are responsible for his behavior," Dr. Paulo clarified in a session, "but understanding the dynamic that existed between you two can help you avoid repeating these patterns in the future." "What future?" I asked, skeptical. "I'm 52 years old, physically limited, emotionally destroyed. What future is there for me now?" "The future you choose to build," he responded simply. That phrase stayed with me. The future you choose to build. Implicit was the idea that I had choices, that I wasn't trapped by the past, or even the painful present, that I could somehow start over. But how to start over when every movement still hurt? When my body seemed to be at war with me? When even simple tasks, taking a shower, getting dressed, preparing a meal, required monumental effort? The answer came from an unexpected source. Carmen, the cleaning lady who worked for Claudia, had a daughter with cerebral palsy. One day, while she was cleaning the apartment, she saw me struggling to put on a sock, frustrated with my limitations. "Can I show you an easier way?" she offered kindly. Carmen taught me little tricks she had learned while helping her daughter, ways to perform everyday tasks with less effort and pain, an extension handle to reach objects without bending over, a stool in the shower so I wouldn't have to stand. Small adaptations that made a huge difference. "My Laura says we need to be clever," she remarked, as she showed me how to use a long-handled hairbrush. Find different ways to do things. I started applying this philosophy to all aspects of my life. If I couldn't do something the traditional way, I found an alternative. If a movement caused pain, I tried a different one. Gradually, I adapted my routine to my new limitations, rather than fighting against them. The muscle spasms have lessened. They haven't disappeared completely, but they have become less frequent and less intense. My sleep has improved, still interrupted by occasional nightmares, but more restorative. I began to regain some of the weight I'd lost. In the 3rd month at Claudia's house, I received an envelope from the law firm I had hired. Inside, the divorce papers initiated by me. I looked at those pages for a long time before signing, not out of hesitation or regret, but because they represented the official end of more than half of my life. "Are you sure?" Claudia asked, seeing me standing with the pen in my hand. "Absolutely," I replied, and I signed my name on every indicated line. Carlos contested, of course. He tried to arrange meetings to talk in person. He sent handwritten letters full of promises and apologies. He even showed up at the clinic where I was undergoing physical therapy, begging for a chance to explain. I stood firm. There was no explanation that could erase that moment. The towel on the floor. "I'm not your servant." While the legal proceedings followed their course, I focused on my physical recovery. The physical therapy sessions began to show more visible results. I could walk longer distances without the cane. The pain, though still present, became more manageable. Ricardo was pleased with my progress. "You are an exemplary patient," he commented during an evaluation. "Your commitment to the exercises is accelerating your recovery." I didn't mention that the exercises had become more than just physical therapy. They were my anchor, my daily proof that I could overcome limits, that I still had control over something in my life. In the 4th month, I began considering options for the future. I couldn't stay indefinitely at Claudia's house. No matter how much she insisted, there was no rush. I needed my own space, adapted to my needs. The apartment I shared with Carlos would be sold as part of the divorce settlement. I would have resources to start over, but where? How? "Have you thought about going back to work?" Dr. Paulo asked during a session. Before the surgery, I was a librarian at a university. I loved my job, the contact with books, with the students. I had taken a 6-month medical leave, which was already coming to an end. "I'm not sure if I'm ready," I confessed. "Physically, emotionally, maybe you don't need to go back at the same pace as before," he suggested. "You could explore options. Part-time, maybe, or something that requires less physical effort." The idea started to take shape in my mind. I talked to my former boss, who was open to discussing possibilities. Maybe a gradual return, with responsibilities adapted to my current limitations. Maybe a special project I could coordinate without having to stand for long periods. The prospect of returning to an activity that I enjoyed brought new energy. I began to dress more carefully in the morning, to put on makeup occasionally. Small gestures of self-care that I had abandoned in the previous months. 7 months after the towel was thrown on the floor, I was finally ready for a new beginning. I signed the lease for a small ground-floor apartment, 10 minutes away from the library where I worked. It was modest but bright, with a backyard where I could grow the plants I always wanted to have, and that Carlos considered useless and laborious. I hired a moving company to transport the few pieces of furniture I received in the division of assets. Claudia insisted on gifting me new appliances. "Housewarming present," she said, rejecting my protests. Maria arrived with curtains she had sewn herself, in shades of green and blue that made the environment more welcoming. My first day alone in the new apartment felt strange. After months at Claudia's house, the silence seemed deafening. I sat in the living room chair for a long time, just observing the space around me. The white walls still without pictures, the empty shelves waiting for books, the small but functional kitchen. Everything there was mine, only mine, a territory free from painful memories, unfulfilled expectations, and broken promises. "Welcome to your new beginning, Lucia," I whispered to myself. The return to work was gradual, as planned. I started with 4 hours a day, 3 times a week. My role had been adapted. I was now coordinating the digitalization project of the historical collection, something I could mostly do sitting, with breaks when necessary. It was stimulating to be immersed again in the world of books, research, and knowledge. Physically, there were still limitations. The back pain would probably be a companion for the rest of my life, but I had learned to manage it. I knew which movements to avoid, which exercises helped, and when it was time to rest. I always carried a small heating pad for the days when the muscles protested more intensely. The physical therapy sessions were reduced to once a week, more as maintenance than intensive treatment. Ricardo was satisfied with my progress. "You have exceeded all expectations," he commented during an evaluation. "Your determination made all the difference." I didn't mention that it was anger, initially, that fueled this determination. The visceral need to prove, to myself, not to Carlos, that I could survive without him, that I could, in fact, do much more than simply survive. Therapy with Dr. Paulo continued, now bi-weekly. Our conversations had evolved. We no longer talked just about the pain of abandonment, but about who I was beyond that experience, about old dreams that could be resurrected, about new possibilities that I had never considered before. "What have you always wanted to do but never allowed yourself?" he asked in one session. I reflected for a moment. "Travel alone," I finally responded. Carlos always hated the idea. He said it was dangerous, unnecessary. "And now, what stops you?" It was a simple but profound question. What was stopping me? Not Carlos, certainly. Not anymore. Perhaps just the habit of thinking of myself as someone who didn't do that kind of thing. Someone who needed permission, company, approval. The following week, I bought a ticket to Ouro Preto. A short trip, just a weekend, but symbolic. The historic city had been on my wish list for years. Carlos always found excuses to postpone the visit. Too far, too expensive, too tiring. When I told Claudia about my plans, she immediately offered to accompany me. "No, thank you," I responded, surprising both of us with my firmness. I need to do this alone, and so it was. On an October Friday, I boarded a bus with a small suitcase, a tourist guidebook, and a mix of anxiety and excitement that I hadn't felt since my youth. The trip was long, and at times uncomfortable for my still sensitive back, but each kilometer traveled seemed to take me away, not just geographically from the past, but emotionally as well. The hotel I chose was simple, but cozy. A converted colonial mansion with a view of the rooftops of the historic town. I spent the entire Saturday exploring Baroque churches, museums, cobblestone streets. I walked slowly, respecting my limits, stopping to rest when necessary. There was no rush, no rigid itinerary to follow, no one complaining about wasting time. On Sunday, sitting at a cafe in the main square, observing the movement of tourists and locals, I realized I was smiling, a spontaneous smile, born not from a conscious effort to appear well, but from a genuine sense of contentment. It was as if a part of me, dormant for a long time, had finally awakened. I returned home renewed, with small souvenirs from the trip, a book about colonial architecture, a painting by a local artist, a carved wooden box, objects that represented not just a pleasant weekend, but a milestone in my journey of rebuilding. Other small achievements followed. I enrolled in a ceramics course, something I had always wanted to try. I started attending a reading group at the library, where I met people with similar interests to mine. I planted herbs and flowers in the small backyard, learning through trial and error what thrived in that space. Not everything was easy, of course. There were days when the loneliness was heavy, nights when I woke up in the middle of the darkness, momentarily disoriented by not feeling the presence of another person in the bed. Occasions when an unexpected memory, a song Carlos liked, the smell of a perfume similar to his, brought back that feeling of emptiness in the chest. Almost a year after the divorce, I received an unexpected email. It was from Carlos, sent from the same professional address he used when we were married. The subject simply said, "Request." I stared at the unopened message for a long time, the cursor blinking on the screen like a question mark. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading. Another part, curious, wanted to know what he could possibly want after all this time. Finally, I clicked to open it. The message was short. "Lucia, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I would understand if you simply ignored this email, but I need to see you one last time, not to try for a reconciliation. I know that bridge was burned by my own hand. Just to say some things in person that need to be said. I've been in treatment for 6 months. Therapy, medication for depression. I'm not saying this to win your sympathy, just to give context. If you agree to meet me, you can choose the place, time, and conditions. I will bring the documents that still need to be signed for the transfer of the beach house to your name, as agreed upon in the divorce. Carlos." I read the message 3 times, trying to decipher if there was any hidden manipulation between the lines. I consulted Dr. Paulo in the next session, showing him the email. "What do you want to do?" he asked after reading it. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to refuse, move on without looking back. Another part maybe needs this closure. There is no right or wrong answer," he pondered. "The question is, do you feel emotionally strong enough for this meeting?" I reflected for a few days before answering. Finally, I wrote a short message, setting clear conditions. A public cafe, in the middle of the afternoon, for a maximum of 30 minutes. I notified him that Claudia would be at a nearby table in case I needed support. On the appointed day, I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. I chose a table near the window, with good lighting. I ordered green tea while I waited. Claudia positioned herself discreetly 2 tables away, pretending to work on her laptop, but clearly vigilant. Carlos arrived punctually. He looked different, thinner, with deep dark circles, hair grayer than I remembered. He was carrying a folder of documents under his arm. Our eyes met briefly as he approached. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting down in front of me. I nodded, not trusting my voice at that moment. It felt strange to be there, facing the man who had shared my life for so long and who, with a single gesture, had destroyed everything we had built. "Are you okay?" he asked after an uncomfortable silence. "I'm fine," I responded simply. I didn't elaborate or offer details about my current life. That's not what he had come for, and I wasn't willing to share. Carlos cleared his throat, visibly nervous. "I brought the documents for the beach house," he said, opening the folder. "Everything is ready for your signature. After that, we just need to take it to the notary." "Thank you," I replied, taking the papers to quickly examine them. Another silence settled as I read the documents. Everything seemed in order. The transfer of the small beach house we bought on our 10th wedding anniversary to my sole name, part of the divorce settlement that had been delayed due to bureaucratic issues. "Lucia," he began when I returned the signed papers, "what I did to you was unforgivable. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm here because I need you to know. The problem was never you." I looked at him. I really looked. At the man I once loved deeply. At the man who destroyed me with cruel words in a moment of extreme vulnerability. "I know that now," I responded calmly. "But there was a time when I believed it was. That if I hadn't gotten sick, if I hadn't needed help, you would have stayed by my side." "I would have," he admitted, surprising me, "but not for the right reasons. I would have continued out of convenience, fear of change, attachment to routine, not out of true love, not as you deserved." His words struck something deep within me, a truth I had already glimpsed in my sessions with Dr. Paulo, but it seemed more real coming from Carlos's own lips. "The surgery just exposed what was already broken," I continued. "It was cruel, but maybe necessary." He nodded slowly. "I've been working on that in therapy. How I used our relationship, you, our life together as a shield against my own demons. When you needed me, those demons emerged. I panicked and threw in the towel," I concluded, the image still vivid in my memory. Carlos visibly shuddered. "There isn't a day that I don't regret that moment. Those words. I am not your servant," I repeated, the words that had haunted me for so long. Strangely, saying them aloud, to the man who spoke them, seemed to drain some of their power over me. "I was wrong," he said, his voice choked. "You weren't treating me like a servant. You were just asking what anyone would ask of their partner, what I should have offered without you needing to ask." We were silent for a moment. It wasn't a comfortable silence like the ones we shared in better times, but it wasn't charged with tension like in our last months together. It was a silence of mutual recognition, of truths finally spoken out loud. "You look well," he finally commented. "Stronger." "I am," I confirmed. "Not just physically. I discovered a strength in me that I didn't know existed. I'm happy for you sincerely." And surprisingly, he seemed sincere. There was no envy or resentment in his eyes, just a kind of melancholic resignation, the recognition of a missed opportunity, of irreparable damage. I looked at the clock. Our 30 minutes were almost up. In a way, it was fitting. 23 years reduced to half an hour of late confessions in some random cafe. "I need to go," I said, gathering my bag and the signed documents. Carlos nodded. "Thank you for coming, for listening to me." I stood up, feeling only a slight discomfort in my back. Nothing compared to the excruciating pain of the first few months. Nothing compared to the agony of feeling discarded, invisible, unworthy. "Goodbye, Carlos," I said simply. "Goodbye, Lucia," he replied, staying seated as I walked away. I didn't look back as I left the cafe, Claudia quietly following me. I didn't need to see his expression, to know if he cried or smiled or just sat there, contemplating the emptiness left where our marriage once existed. That meeting, which I had feared for days, turned out to be more liberating than I had expected. Not because of Carlos's apologies or explanations, but because it confirmed something I had already been building within myself. I had survived. Not just the surgery, not just the abandonment, but the idea that I needed him to feel complete. That night, sitting in the backyard of my small apartment, among the herbs and flowers I had planted with my own hands, I reflected on the journey of the last 18 months. From the broken, humiliated woman who watched a towel being thrown to the ground as the final symbol of rejection, to the person I had become. Still imperfect, still in process, still with days of pain and loneliness, but whole in my own way. The towel on the floor was not the end of my story. It was just the end of a chapter. Painful, yes, but necessary so that the next ones could be written. In my own handwriting, at my own pace, choosing my own words. He didn't know, in that moment of cruelty, that by abandoning me when I needed him most, he was setting me free to find within myself what I had always sought from him. Strength, validation, a sense of self-worth. He didn't see that. Even broken, even crying, even dependent on a cane to walk, I was still stronger than both of us had imagined. "I'm not your servant," he said, and he threw the towel on the floor, but I picked it up, and with it, I wiped away my tears, lifted my chin, and moved forward, one step at a time, at my own pace, toward a future that neither he nor I could have imagined, a future that, finally, was mine alone. If this moved you, the next video will move you even more. Click here and stay with me.